Welcome to AP World History. This is Chapter 22. We're going to look at Asia being uh, going through a transition period where they become part of the global economy. Um, the European nations that will have the most effect in India, Africa, and China are going to be the Portuguese, the Dutch, the English, the French to a certain degree, and also the Spanish in the Philippines. Um, Up until about 1750, Europeans were content to control seaports. They didn't make much inroads because the number of people they would have been facing far outnumbered how many men they had available. So they confined themselves to the coast and traded with the locals, and at times extracted tribute uh, from local chieftains. Um, uh, you remember that the Ming Dynasty had, for a period of time, become a global trader in terms of Southeast Asia, India, and Africa. And then, after about a 30-year period, they will pull back and abandon that, mainly because they see it as too expensive. Um, Qing, Qing Hu is the fellow that leads these expeditions, uh, and eventually he will retire, go back to China. As far as Christianity, converting Asians is somewhat limited. Probably the Philippines converting to Catholicism, the Catholic Church, find the biggest success. In terms of Jesuit priests trying to convert Indians, they appeal to the untouchables, but not to the upper class of India, the Hindus. Um, in terms of China, the Confucianism is pretty well rooted there. There will be a limited success in Japan, but eventually the shogun will cast the Christians out and persecute them. There'll be an inquisition there. Um, in terms of how the Europeans controlled these different areas, they tried to undermine the leadership at times, play one faction against another. There were clearly three zones of trade in uh, uh, Asia. We have the Middle East, Africa, India, and China, and part of China, the Southeast Asia. This was open to Indian and Muslim traders initially, and then when the arrival of the Portuguese in the 15th century, they'll make contact in India and then later move over to Malacca off the coast of Malaysia. And these were peaceful interactions among the merchants. It's going to be a different story when the Portuguese come to India and Southeast Asia. They're going to be inclined to use force, mainly because the people in these areas are really not interested in trading for what the Portuguese have. Now, when the Portuguese and the Spanish bring silver, and the English, they're interested in swapping silver and gold for cotton and silk and porcelain and spices, ivory and so forth. But really, the products coming out of Europe are considered by these people in the Middle East, India, and China as being inferior. The Portuguese will land in a couple of places. Vasco da Gama will round the Cape of Good Hope and discover a route to India. Uh, Calicut and Goa are the two places that he comes ashore and makes contact. Um, Islam is still the predominant religion along the coast of East Africa, Hinduism in India, Muslims in Southeast Asia, and Confucianism and Shintoism in Japan, Confucianism in China. So the Catholic Church was blocked in most of these areas. Initially, the Asians do not see them as a threat, but as time goes on, they will see the Europeans becoming more and more a threat. And by 1750, there's going to be a fundamental change, and the countries, the colonial nations, are going to try to conquer and control more land area, take control of the area, rather than just confine themselves to seaports. Here you can see Goa on the west coast, and we see Malacca is very important in the Strait of Java. You can see it located here in Southeast Asia. There are some crucial points. Before the Portuguese get there, the Indian and Muslim traders hugged the coastline, dead reckoning. They didn't have the navigational equipment to tackle open sea sailing. The ships weren't that good, but the better ships, better technology will allow them to use sea lanes, use the Indian Ocean, and cut down the time it takes to sail to these various countries. The Portuguese tried to control the trade in India, but for the most part, because of their limited number, were not able to do that. By the 16th century, the Dutch and the British will challenge the Portuguese, and eventually the Portuguese will be forced out. The Dutch will take over Malacca, and Batavia will fall under their control. And India, both the east and the west side, will eventually come under the control of the British. The French will be there for a while until the French and Indian War, but then after the French and Indian War in the 18th century, they will be kicked out, and British will have control solely of India. What were they looking for? They were looking for the spice in Southeast Asia, the cotton in India, slaves in Africa, gold. Salt was a big thing coming out of India. Of course, in Asia or China, they were looking for silk, and they were also looking for porcelain, those kinds of items, and they were very highly prized in Europe. The Portuguese tended to have the guns blazing. The British the British to a certain extent, and also the Dutch, are going to use diplomatic means. They believe that peaceful exploitation seems to make for better trade. The Dutch are primarily interested in only controlling the spices coming out of Southeast Asia, the cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, those kinds of things, highly prized in Europe. And the British will follow suit. Rather than killing your neighbors, maybe a good neighbor policy, getting along with the local leaders. The reason that the Europeans are going to be so successful is because they have a better technology. They have guns, they have cannons, swords, breastplates for armor. Their ships are better. Eventually, they will use a tribute system where local chiefs, rulers, pay them tribute each year and remain loyal to them, and they're free to rule their people as they wish. This is particularly true in the Philippines, Java, and Sri Lanka, where the people would pay the tribute every year. As far as the spread of Christianity, we talked about this before. The Jesuit priests are going to send missionaries to this area. The Protestants, not so much. Francis Xavier was a missionary who goes to India, has some success with the Untouchables, doesn't make too many converts in the upper echelon because of the caste system. Nobly also will go to the different areas. He's a Jesuit trying to make converts in India. Uh, but for the most part, the caste system keeps the Catholic Church out. And as I said before, the Philippines probably was the only country in the area that converted